The restaurant went silent the moment I set the folder down next to my mother's wine glass. 22 years of silence, and now a private dining room full of relatives holding their breath. My mother had just finished telling the table I'd abandoned the family and was hoarding my grandmother's money. My twin sister sat at the far end, too thin, staring at her plate. My father's jaw worked like he was chewing something he couldn't swallow. I rested 2 fingers on the folder and didn't open it yet. What was inside it is the reason my parents haven't spoken to me since, and by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why that folder destroyed them. But to get there, you need to go back to the night they decided one daughter was enough. Welcome back to Silent Revenge Stories, where family stories stay with you long after the table's cleared. I'm Charlotte. If this story ever hits close to home, subscribe so the next one finds you. Let me tell you who I am before they try to tell you for me. I'm a large animal vet in Merrow Creek, Wisconsin, population under 4,000, mostly dairy. I pull calves at 3 in the morning. Blood doesn't scare me. People who smile while they lie to you, that's different. My husband Sam welds and runs 40 leased acres. We have 2 kids, Mia and Eli. We're not rich. We're rooted. That word matters, because for the first 12 years of my life I wasn't rooted anywhere, and I never once asked the people who raised me for help. I'd made peace with that. Or thought I had. Then one Tuesday in February, I was washing iodine off my hands at the clinic when my phone lit up with an Iowa number. Something made me answer. A pause, a breath I hadn't heard in 2 decades, then a voice careful and sweet, the way you'd talk to a horse you weren't sure would bolt. Charlotte, honey, it's your mother. I set the towel down slowly. My mother does not call me honey. My mother does not call me at all. Whatever she wanted, it wasn't me, and by the time you hear what she actually wanted, you'll understand exactly why I should have hung up right then. You don't forget the night your parents give you away. I was 12. There was a suitcase by the door, my clothes folded inside. My mother sat me at the kitchen table and said I'd stay with Uncle Raymond for a while. I asked how long. My father, reading the paper, didn't look up. We'll see how it goes. Upstairs, my twin sister Whitney was with her tutor. She'd just won the state science fair. Ribbons on the fridge, a new desk lamp, a feeling in that house that the future had arrived, and it only had room for one of us. I wasn't a problem child. I just wasn't a prodigy, and in that house those had become the same thing. Raymond's truck pulled in around 7. My mother walked me out, hand light on my shoulder like pressing harder would make it real, kissed my head, said, "Be good for your uncle," and went back inside before the truck even backed out. Through the kitchen window I watched her lift the pot roast off the table and scrape the plates, getting on with the evening. A while turned into the rest of my childhood. Here's the math of that house, because everything later runs on it. My parents had twins and decided twins were a portfolio. Whitney tested into the gifted program in 2nd grade, I didn't. From that day, resources flowed one direction, tutors, math camps, violin, while I got hand-me-downs and a library card. My mother had given up a doctoral program in chemistry the year she got pregnant with us, and Whitney was going to live the life she'd been cheated out of. I was overhead, the line item you trim. I heard my father say it once through the heating vent, "We can only invest in one future, Linda. You spread it thin, you lose them both." I was 11, lying on the floor, learning exactly what I was worth on a spreadsheet. The suitcase by the door was just the paperwork catching up to a decision they'd already made. Uncle Raymond was my father's brother, considered a failure for leaving the city for Merrow Creek, which let my parents tell themselves I'd landed somewhere lesser and stop thinking about me. The farm was 40 minutes out. Diane, Raymond's wife, set a 3rd plate every night like I'd always belonged there. The 2nd week, Raymond woke me before dawn, heifers calving. Watch or sleep. I watched. When that calf finally slid onto the straw, something in my chest came loose. Diane taught me you feed people whether or not they've earned it. Raymond taught me you show up at 3 a.m. for things that can't speak for themselves. By the end of that year I'd stopped flinching when someone reached toward me, And out behind the milk house I made myself a promise: I would never need my parents again. I'd build a life so solid they couldn't take a single brick of it. I kept that promise for 22 years. What I didn't see coming was the day they'd try to take the whole house, and the one relative who saw it coming first was the last person I expected. The work saved me. By 16 I was going into the barn alone. Animals don't grade you. Somewhere in there I decided to become a vet and aimed at it like a dog at a thrown ball. But the part that still cracks me open is the cards. 3 or 4 times a year, an envelope from my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother, arrived with a folded $10 bill and a line that always ended the same way: "Thinking of you, love, Grandma." She never said a bad word about my parents. She didn't have to. While everyone else pretended I'd evaporated, Eleanor kept a string tied between us. I had no idea she was doing more than loving me from a distance. I had no idea she was watching, counting, keeping a wooden box, and I had no idea how little time was left to thank her, until Diane's old number lit up my phone with news about Eleanor's heart. Fast forward through the good years: vet school, buying out Doc Pruitt's practice, meeting Sam at a feed store, marrying him in Raymond's pasture, Mia, then Eli. A life that looked small on paper and felt enormous. I never sent my parents a single update, not out of spite, out of survival. Eleanor knew everything anyway, through the cards. Her last one read: "You did the thing I prayed you'd do. You built something they can't ration." I didn't understand ration yet. Then that same February, the care home called. Eleanor had had a stroke. I drove the 40 minutes in 30. Her face was pulled by the stroke, but her eyes found me and sharpened. "Charlie," she said, the name only she and Raymond used. She had something urgent to say and not much road left. "The box. Wooden box at the house. There's things in it you need to know when I'm gone. Promise me you'll open it yourself. Don't let your father near it." I promised. "Good," she said. "Now they can't ration you." Her eyes drifted to the window, her hand went loose in mine, and 3 days later she was gone. I never got to ask what ration meant, but I'd made a promise, and I keep those. The funeral was small. My parents didn't come. Whitney didn't come. What surprised me was Aunt Pam, my mother's sister, cornering me by the coffee urn in a good black coat with eyes that weren't wet. Did she ever get her affairs in order? There it was: they hadn't come to mourn, they'd sent a scout. I told her the lawyer was handling it and watched that word land on her like a dropped plate. My grandmother wasn't even in the ground, and the family that wrote me off had suddenly remembered my address. The only question left was how much they thought was in that box. Eleanor's lawyer, Marisol Vance, had an office above a hardware store and a 15-year retainer that surprised even me. "Your grandmother was specific and organized," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Eleanor had left me the bulk of her estate, a house she'd rented out for years, and savings fed steadily for 2 decades. Life-changing for a rural vet with school debt. But Marisol wasn't finished. She set down a sealed letter and the wooden box Eleanor had made me promise to open alone. "There's a no-contest clause," Marisol said. "In 15 years I've drafted that maybe twice. Anyone who challenges this will and loses forfeits everything. Your grandmother expected a fight." I asked from who. She didn't say, but she told me to make it airtight. I drove home with the sealed letter on my passenger seat, unopened, wanting the right kind of a loan. I'd barely set it on the counter when the Iowa number called again. My mother's voice poured out warm as syrup: "Life's too short, isn't it? We saw about your grandmother, it put everything in perspective. Your father and I have regrets. We'd love a fresh start. A family dinner, everyone. Will you come?" I said nothing. Then I noticed the timing: my grandmother 3 weeks dead, an estate freshly mine, and suddenly the sentimentality. People don't get sentimental on a schedule, they get sentimental on a deadline. "We're not getting any younger, honey," she said. "Family should help family." Help. There was the word under all the syrup. I told her I'd think about it, and hung up thinking, Whatever's in that box, I'd better read it before I sit at any table they've set. Marisol laid it out plainly the next morning. The estate was legally mine, the clause was solid, I owed no one an explanation, but if they wanted to drag it through court, they could stall for months and poison every relationship I had left along the way. Don't sign anything at a dinner, she warned. People who plan dinners like this are usually planning more than dinner. Then my phone buzzed, a text from a number I hadn't saved but recognized instantly. Whitney. I know this is out of nowhere. Can we talk? Just us. Please. Every instinct said it was part of the same play. But there was a please on the end that didn't fit the script. We met at a coffee shop halfway between us, neutral ground. I barely recognized her, hollow-cheeked, careful, hands that wouldn't settle. Her ed-tech startup had collapsed 18 months ago, dragging her marriage and finances down with it. She was 34, living in our parents' basement. Then she said the thing that changed the temperature of the whole table. I always wondered about you. I asked Mom once why you never came home. She said you chose to live with Uncle Raymond, that you liked it better there, that you didn't want to be part of our family. I set my cup down carefully. Whitney. I didn't choose anything. I was 12. They packed a suitcase and put me in a truck. Something shifted behind her eyes, a load-bearing belief giving way. That's not what they told me, she whispered. And right there, in a strip mall coffee shop, I realized the lie was bigger and older than I'd ever known. I drove straight to Eleanor's empty rental house. The wooden box was exactly where Marisol said, wrapped in one of Eleanor's scarves. I sat at the kitchen table and opened her letter first. Her handwriting had gone shaky, but the voice was all hers. My dear Charlie, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and finally able to say what I held my tongue about too long. I watched her parents make their choice and told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I've regretted that quiet every day since. So I did the next thing, I kept what they threw away, including the truth. There was money meant for both of you girls equally. What they did with your half, you'll find in the box. I'm not leaving you my house to make you rich. I'm leaving it to you so you never have to sit at their table and beg for a seat. You earned that seat the day you were born. They're the ones who forgot. Use the box if they make you. Don't if they don't. Either way, you're free now. Stand up straight. Love, Grandma. Under the photographs in the box, the temperature changed, bank statements, a manila envelope soft with handling, notarized legal pages. This wasn't sentiment. This was a case file, quietly assembled over years. And what it proved would flip the entire dinner table in one motion, but first, the fund itself. Here's what the bank statements said, in plain English. When Whitney and I were small, an account was opened in both our names, the Ingram Children's Education Fund, seeded by Eleanor, meant to put 2 girls through college. Steady deposits until I was about 13. Then, the year after I was sent away, withdrawals started, tuition, math camps, violin, private school, private college, all flowing to one name, Whitney's. My half, the half with my name on it, was drained to nothing by the time I was 17. They hadn't just chosen not to spend on me. They'd taken what was already mine and funneled it into the daughter they kept. I didn't cry. I got steady, lined up the statements by date, and started quietly building the case my grandmother had handed me the foundation for. I brought the box to Marisol, who went still at the manila envelope. This account had both girls as named beneficiaries. Moving one beneficiary's entire share to the other without consent, while you were a minor, that's not a family squabble. That could be actionable. I said I didn't want a war, just to be left alone with my real family. She looked at me over her glasses. You walked in thinking you had a shield. You actually have a sword, too. The question is whether you ever have to draw it. My phone buzzed, my mother, chipper, Saturday the 14th, 6 p.m., the Hollowbrook room. Where's something nice? I looked at the box, then Marisol. She picked the stage, I said. I'll bring the script. I decided to go because of where it was, my town, not theirs, in front of the one audience my mother had spent decades managing, the extended family who'd only ever heard I was the difficult daughter who chose to leave. If I stayed home, that story won by default. So I built a folder that week, not theater, just the essentials, the notarized guardianship transfer, the drained funds bank statements, Eleanor's letter. And one more piece was still coming that would turn the whole thing from a shield into a verdict. I told my kids the truth in kid-sized pieces and made the hardest call of the week: they would not be at that dinner. Sam wanted to be in the room with me. I needed him to be the steady thing our children came home to instead. Whatever you say in there, he told me at the door, you've already won the part that matters. You've got us. 3 days out, Whitney texted again, nervous, saying things weren't adding up for her anymore. I told her I'd see her Saturday. I didn't tell her what I was bringing. And the next morning, Marisol called with the piece that changed everything. I went looking for the guardianship records, she said, sliding a notarized copy across the desk. A voluntary transfer of custody, dated the spring I was 12, signed by both my parents, granting guardianship to Raymond, not temporary, not emergency, indefinite. In the section for reason, in my father's blocky handwriting, parents unable to allocate adequate resources to both minors. They'd put it in writing, notarized. The lie my mother told Whitney, that I'd chosen to leave, was demolished by one sentence my own parents had signed when I was a child. And here was the turn the whole story hinges on: my parents had no idea I had this. They still believed they controlled the only version of events that existed. They were about to walk into that dinner and run the same play they'd always run, on an audience that no longer only had their side of the story. The estate would formally settle the following Tuesday, 3 days after the dinner, locking the will permanently, unless someone contested first. Marisol had already heard from my parents' lawyer, a letter of intent to contest, citing undue influence on a dying woman. They'll lose, Marisol said, but they want to settle their way first, get you to hand Whitney a slice voluntarily before a judge ever sees what they did with that fund. The dinner wasn't reconciliation. It was a deadline maneuver. Get me in a room, apply 22 years of pressure and 100 watching eyes, extract a signature before the law made everything permanent. They had 3 days. So did I. Aunt Pam moved first, calling cousins, seeding a story 2 days before the dinner. Charlotte swept in at the end. She's cold, money-focused. The old me would have called everyone to defend myself, sounding exactly as guilty as she wanted. Instead I let it build, because every cousin she poisoned was one more witness who'd be sitting in that room when I set the folder down. Pam thought she was burying me. She was building me an audience. I called the bank and got written confirmation of both named beneficiaries. I called Whitney and told her everything: the fund, the guardianship paper, our father's handwriting. Long silence. I didn't know, she said, voice cracking. I thought they told me you didn't want. She couldn't finish. I didn't ask her to promise anything. You don't make a drowning person carry your weight too. That night my father called, first time in 22 years. No syrup, just flat transaction, family helps family. Your grandmother saw to it you did well. Time to be reasonable about sharing what's frankly more than your share. Then, without a flicker of self-awareness, he said the exact sentence I'd heard through a heating vent at 11 years old: we can only invest in one future. You understood that then, understand it now. 23 years, and he hadn't even updated the line. He'd just handed me, freely, over the phone, the entire philosophy that justified throwing away a child. I said, I heard you, Dad. I'll see you Saturday, and hung up. What settled over me wasn't rage burns out. It was certainty. There was nothing wrong with me. There was something wrong with the spreadsheet, and the man who still thought it balanced. The night before the dinner, Whitney called again, quietly unraveling a memory. She'd once asked our mother why I never visited, and been told, Charlotte chose to stay with Uncle Raymond. She doesn't really want to be part of this family. Don't take it personally. Whitney had believed it for 2 decades. She made me think you didn't love us, Whitney said, crying. The whole time I was the one who got thrown away. Our mother hadn't just discarded me, she'd rewritten me into the villain of my sister's childhood, so no one in that house would ever lie awake wondering if they'd done something wrong. I don't think I can keep saying their words anymore, Whitney said. It was nearly enough. The morning of the dinner I did my rounds like any other Saturday, no performing for a sick animal, you either help it or you don't. That afternoon I laid the folder out one last time, the guardianship transfer, the bank statements, the certified bank letter, Eleanor's letter. No grievances, no theater, just the cold facts Marisol said would do the cutting themselves. I dressed plainly, wore a sweater Diane had knitted me years ago, and drove into town. At a red light, my phone buzzed, a family group text I'd been added to days earlier. My mother had sent a message to the wrong thread. It read, "Once she signs Grandma's share over to Whitney tonight, we put all this behind us. Don't let her leave without the agreement. Be warm, but firm." I read it twice. There it was, the whole loving reconciliation reduced to a tactical instruction, sent to 30 relatives by accident. I screenshotted it before she deleted it a minute later, followed by a flustered wrong chat and a laughing emoji. You can't unsend what 30 people already saw, and you definitely can't unsend what I'd already saved. The folder in my bag had been a careful, surgical thing. Now it had teeth. I have to back up one night, because it matters. Before the dinner I drove to see Raymond, 80 now, slower. He told me something I'd never known, that my father had called him 22 years ago and asked if he'd take me like a heifer he couldn't carry through winter, and Raymond said yes before he even finished the sentence. Best thing that ever happened to this farm, he said, was that man's worst day as a father. Then, family isn't the people who can afford to keep you, Charlie. It's the people who never once did the math. Whatever the folder did the next night, I'd already won the only thing that mattered. I'd been kept, not by the people who made me, by the people who chose me. So that's who walked into the Hollowbrook room, not the difficult daughter, not the girl who chose to leave, but a woman who pulls calves at 3 a.m., who'd been kept by people who never did the math, with a screenshot in her pocket and nothing left to prove. 15 faces around a long table under a brass chandelier. My mother in pearls, mid-laugh, performing host. My father, gray and grim. Pam, sharp-eyed. Whitney, small and pale at the far end. My mother hugged me like nothing had ever happened, and I let her, arms loose, the way you let weather happen. Through soup and the entree, my mother ran the table like a woman who'd waited decades for this audience, toasting "Family Found Again," softly rewriting the last 22 years. Then she turned the warmth up and landed it, Grandma Eleanor wasn't quite herself at the end. She made some decisions that weren't fair, but we can fix that, as a family, tonight. She'd actually brought a paper, folded by her plate, a pen ready, certain I'd cave under all those eyes. I asked her, calmly, why she thought Eleanor's will was unfair. That was all the invitation she needed. That girl left this family, she said to the table, voice catching with practiced emotion. We tried, we begged, and she turned her back on us. Then when her grandmother was old and confused, she swept in and got everything while her sister has nothing. Truth, she called it, 3 feet from the folder that held the real one. I let the silence stretch. Then I lifted the folder out of my bag and set it beside her wine glass. You're right, I said quietly. This family does deserve the truth. So let's start with mine. I laid the guardianship transfer on the table and read my father's own words aloud, parents unable to allocate adequate resources to both minors. I didn't choose to leave, I said. I was 12. You signed me over in writing, to a notary. I turned to Whitney. Did she tell you I chose to stay away? The whole table turned with me. My mother shot her daughter a warning look that used to end every argument in that house, but Whitney wasn't 12 anymore either, and something 22 years in the making was about to give way. I laid out the second set of pages, the fund, the deposits, then the withdrawals, all flowing to Whitney's name after I was sent away. You didn't just give me away, I said, looking at both of them. You spent me. Dead silence. Then my father, unable to stand being accused without defending the logic he'd lived by, said it loud, indignant, in front of everyone, we did what any responsible parent would do. We can only invest in one future. He'd just confessed, proudly, to 15 witnesses, in his own voice, for free. Pam tried to save the ship, standing half up, accusing me of poisoning Eleanor and putting on a show. So I took out my phone and read my mother's own deleted message aloud. Once she signs Grandma's share over to Whitney tonight, be warm, but firm. This whole dinner wasn't reconciliation, I said. It was a plan to get my signature before the estate settles Tuesday. I passed the phone down the table. The cousin Pam had recruited 2 days earlier looked at her and said, "You told me she swept in for the money. This says you planned this." Pam's whisper campaign collapsed under a single screenshot in the same room she'd built it for. Then, slowly, Whitney stood, shaking, hands flat on the table. "Sit down," our mother warned. Whitney didn't. She told the whole table what our mother had told her at 12, that I'd chosen to leave, that I didn't want to be part of the family, and how she'd believed it for 2 decades. The whole time, she said, voice cracking but not stopping, they gave her away, spent her college money on me, and let me hate her for it so I'd never ask the hard questions. You stole my sister from me and told me she left. And our mother broke, the host mask gone, screaming about everything she'd sacrificed, red-faced, in front of the family she'd performed for her entire life. I sat still and let them all watch the woman who called me cold finally show the room who'd been cold all along. When she ran out of breath, I stood, gathered my papers, and said at once, calm, I'm not signing anything. Grandma's will is valid and documented. It settles Tuesday, to me. The fund is separate, you moved money out of an account with my name on it while I was a child. Talk to your lawyer before you talk to me again. To the rest of the table, you've been lied to for 22 years. I don't hold that against you. I hold it against the 2 people who told the lie. Then I turned to Whitney, put one of Marisol's cards in her hand, not for the estate, for her, and said, when you're ready to stand on your own feet, not theirs, not mine, call me as a sister. I walked out into the cold, clean dark of my own town, and didn't look back. The estate settled that Tuesday exactly as Eleanor built it. My parents' lawyer, once he saw the bank statements and the guardianship paper, quietly withdrew the contest. No court fight. Pam went silent and isn't welcome at most family gatherings anymore. My mother posted a weepy thing online about ungrateful children, almost no one engaged. You can't whisper a story to people who already watched the truth happen. A month later, a cold 1-page letter arrived. My parents had removed me from their will. I read it at my mailbox and felt only relief. They'd taken back something that was never really mine, a place in a family that had only ever measured me. I signed the acknowledgement without hesitation and dropped it in the same blue mailbox Eleanor's cards used to come from. Whitney called that spring, not for money. She'd used Marisol's referral, found work, moved into her own place 2 states away. You said to call when I was standing on my own feet, she said. So I'm calling. It's not fixed. 22 years doesn't close in one phone call. But the door's open now, and we use it. She came out to the farm in June and watched my kids run across the same pasture where I got married. Eleanor's old house is ours now, rented to a young family who keep chickens. Sometimes I park outside it and just thank the woman who spent her last years quietly building me a shield out of bank statements and love. She never let me beg for a seat at my own family's table again. She gave me proof, and with it, peace. Here's what 22 years and one folder taught me: family isn't the people who can afford to keep you. It's the people who never once did the math. If you've ever been told you were the overhead, the long shot not worth the investment, you weren't. They were just bad at counting what mattered. You don't have to shout it. You just have to set it on the table. Tell me your story in the comments, and I'll see you at the next one.